Hi, I'm Jacque Thurman. I'm the clinical director at Hope and Home, and I have with me Wright. He's the executive director at Hope and Home. And today we are doing an advanced class for foster parents. It is called Discipline with Dignity, Handling Conflict with Traumatized Kids.
And if you are not a foster parent, that's perfectly okay. Everything that we're going to be talking about today is just as effective and just as important for any child that you're parenting.
Thanks everyone for being here. This is what we call an advanced core class. At Hope and Home we recruit and certify and train foster parents, and they undergo at least 27 hours of pre-certification training before they are licensed. And on top of that state requirement, we have added some advanced courses because foster care is challenging, and we know that in the beginning foster parents tend to be really excited about getting certified, and with all of the required pre-certification requirements, it's a lot of information to absorb. And so we've designed some advanced courses for foster parents who have recently been certified or who are very close to certification, so that the information might be more relevant to the day-to-day issues they encounter in their homes. So for the foster parents watching this video, they have already taken Discipline with Dignity. That is a core class, and today we are doing this advanced version of Discipline with Dignity. I don't want to say that it's advanced discipline because that gives the wrong impression that it's going to be like super tough, strict discipline. That's not at all what we're saying when we say this is advanced Discipline with Dignity. It's just an advanced course on the topic of discipline with dignity, particularly handling conflict with traumatized children. And we're going to start off with a case study, and I want to pass these out and you guys can read along. Kayla, would you please take these and pass them around to everyone? Thank you. And I want you guys to read along as I read this out loud. We're going to start with a case study of a real situation that happened with one of our families years and years ago. And then we're going to unpack it, and we're going to learn how might this situation have been handled differently. One thing that it's important for foster parents to know is that the success of a foster parent is often directly tied to how well they handle conflict with kids. The success of foster parents is often directly tied to how well they handle conflict with kids. We've been around for 20 years, and we've worked with foster parents and kids of all backgrounds and capabilities. And one thing we know for sure is that whenever foster parents don't handle conflict well with kids, it causes placement disruptions. In other words, kids need to move from their home to another home. It can cause, when a foster parent doesn't handle conflict well with kids, it casts them in an unfavorable light with DHS. And so the motivation for this course is to really equip foster parents to handle conflict well with kids, because we believe that it will translate into greater permanency for kids and more success for foster parents. So here's our case study. This is called the timeout trap. You have a 4-year-old foster son who has been in your home for a week. When you tell him to get his shoes on, to your shock and horror, he replies, "F you, B." Your gut reaction is to plant your hand firmly on his bottom and make sure he never says that to you again. But you're a foster mom, and spanking isn't allowed on foster children. The only alternative to spanking you know is timeout, so you swiftly pick him up and set him on the staircase, firmly telling him You do not ever say that. You will be in timeout for 4 minutes. You sit here until you hear the timer. As you walk away to catch your breath and decompress, he starts kicking and screaming, grabbing onto your hoodie. You pry yourself loose and calmly but firmly remind him that he needs to sit in timeout until the buzzer goes off. You attempt to walk away again, but he won't let you go. Round 2. You pick him up and move him to his bed, telling him that he cannot talk to you the way he did and that he has to stay in timeout to learn his lesson. You warn him that if he gets out of the bed, the timer starts all over. You walk out of his room and into the kitchen, even more frustrated that he is not accepting your discipline. After a bit, his sobbing stops. You notice there are only 2 minutes left on the buzzer, and you feel a sigh of relief, but only for a second. The little rascal has tiptoed out of his room and is peering around the corner looking at you. The buzzer hasn't gone off yet. Round 3. You swiftly pick him up and take him back to his bed, reminding him that he has to stay there until the buzzer goes off and that the timer is starting all over again. You wedge a baby gate in his doorway to keep him in his room for 4 minutes, ignoring his sobbing protest. You're not even halfway down the hallway when you hear the baby gate crashing to the floor. Round 4. You say to yourself, this child is going to learn who's boss. You recall the wise words of your MOPS mentor mom, never let them win. You intensify your resolve, march back into his room and put him firmly on his bed, and then wedge 2 baby gates in his doorway. His sobs turn to raging protest as you walk down the hallway, and again you hear the crash of the baby gates. Round 5. This time you toss the baby gates aside, place him back on his bed, and close his bedroom door before he has a chance to get out. You stand on the outside of his door holding the doorknob so he can't get out. You hear him throwing things and wreaking havoc. You stand at his door holding it closed for 15 minutes. Finally, he has worn himself out. Things quiet down and you crack open the door to discover a bookshelf overturned, books strewn about the room, and this defeated 4-year-old boy, his face swollen and red from crying so hard, his little body hiccuping from his sobs. The rest of your day you are in a daze and he is quiet, exhausted and frazzled. You keep your distance from him and ponder how a normal, happy morning turned into such a miserable day at home. And I promise you, there are so many parents out there who are watching this right now who know exactly how this mom feels. And I remember as a young mom myself, I went to MOPS groups at my church, and I remember one of the MOPS mentor moms saying these words, never let them win. Fortunately, I knew better as a mom, and so I didn't grab onto that and get into massive power struggles with my then 3-year-old. But it really broke my heart that I know a lot of the other moms really did take that to heart. And so never let them win flies in the face of what we teach here at Hope and Home. It flies in the face of what we just taught in our core class, Discipline with Dignity. One of the key principles we talked about in that class is avoid power struggles. And so never let them win is a concept that is going to fuel explosions and power struggles and days like this left and right if we don't counteract that statement. So first of all, let's talk about parenting styles. I have another handout. If someone, thank you, Michael. Let's talk about parenting styles for a minute. So whenever you open any child development textbook, you're going to see 4 broad styles of parenting. What I've done is I've put them on a spreadsheet to kind of show the continuum I've added a brief description of each one. And by the way, this copy is a little weird. The first page of it, you're looking at the description in the upper left-hand corner. That's the first page. And then it flips over kind of in a weird way. But the first page of it starts with the description at the top left-hand corner. So you'll see authoritarian, rigid, punitive. Skip over to flexible, nurturing, grace-based. This in textbooks is called authoritative. I just took the liberty to change the name up a little bit so it'll be a little less confusing, so we don't confuse it with authoritarian. And then permissive, indulgent, and permissive, uninvolved. I've also taken the liberty to add my own category, which I call the logic trend. And we'll talk about that in a second. But let's look at the description of authoritarian, rigid, punitive parenting. Parents are rigid and controlling. They're intrusively involved parents. Parents major in the minors, meaning they punish things that don't need to be punished. They get into power struggles over things that don't matter. They often have unreasonable expectation, such as first-time obedience. Slow obedience is no obedience. They can be highly punitive, often harsh, emotionally distant. Little consideration or awareness of developmental stages. So authoritarian parents see themselves as the supreme dictator and authority, and any child, regardless of age, who doesn't respect that and jump when that parent says jump is considered disobedient and rebellious. And so an authoritarian parent will expect an 18-month-old, to sit still at the doctor's office, for 30 minutes while they wait. An authoritarian parent will slap an 18-month-old's hand who's exploring. Authoritarian parents, if an 18-month or 2-year-old says no, they take it very personally and see it as disobedience and disrespect. And so that fuels punitive parenting, often corporal punishment. There's little verbal exchange, and so whatever authoritarian parent says, that's what goes. The child does not have any right or ability to question or negotiate. Mistakes can be viewed as character flaws, such as rebellious or disobedient, and authoritarian parents often overpower their kids versus empowering them. And this is something that Ross talks about in his book, Empowering versus Overpowering. And just one thing I'll say about that, authoritarian parents can definitely physically overpower their children with corporal punishment or, intimidating body language. But they can also overpower their children just with their words. Very harsh, militaristic vocabulary. Looking at the logic trend, okay, this is something that's emerged in my observation, it's emerged in the last 20 years or so, and I think it's well intended. It's intended to get parents out of the authoritarian mindset. It's intended to be a step away from that. However, in my opinion, it falls short. So an example of the logic trend or the thinking behind the logic trend is children make choices. And whatever choice they make, they endure the consequences of that choice. And so a parent may let a child go hungry at school if he chooses to forget his lunch. Or a parent may make a child walk to school if he chooses to miss the bus. So everything that a child does is simplified into being a choice, something that the child chose. And the logic trend and the authors that write about it recommend like one-liners that parents use with their kids. So they're not necessarily overpowering their kids or intimidating their kids, but they're more emotionally distant. And for example, for a child who forgets his lunch at school, the one-liner that these authors talk about or feed parents is, bummer. It's really a bummer that you forgot your lunch, that you chose to forget your lunch. I guess if you'll go hungry tomorrow, you'll choose to remember your lunch. And so the logic school of thought touts empathy, but that's not empathy, in my opinion. That's cold and distant interaction.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
The flaw in this logic of the logic trend goes back over 1,000 years. And it's kind of interesting to see how this played out in the world of the ancient Greeks. You had Socrates, who said to know the good is to do the good. And it's basically the same philosophy. If you know what's right, then obviously you'll do what's right. And the only reason you don't do what's right is that you simply didn't really know it. You had some sort of false logic. But as much as Socrates believed that, Aristotle completely disagreed and basically said that strips the humanness away from all of us, turns us into robots, into computers. Of course, they didn't have those 1,000 years ago, but the premise is still the same. What Socrates was arguing over and over and over again is that we just have to get it through to people. Once we get it through their heads, then they'll do the right thing. Well, that creates a dynamic where you feel like you're fighting with the kid for them to, quotes, get it. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard foster parents or regular parents say, you know, we had to have a come to Jesus moment, or we had to go out behind the woodshed. There had to be authoritarian and even violent approaches to this, because the mindset is the child doesn't get it. If I can get them to get it, then they'll do the right thing. And what Aristotle says, it has nothing to do with that. If that were true, we wouldn't have diabetes. If that were true, people wouldn't smoke. If that were true, I would have lost 25 pounds by now. All the things that we call human weakness would go away if the simple solution was to know the good. But that's where the logic trend fails and falls flat on its face. To know what's right is so far away from being able to do it. And there's a lot of different versions of knowing what's right, especially when you're dealing with a 2- and a 4-year-old. It's not about convincing them what's right.
Right. So the logic trend will often shame kids in the name of logic. So, for example, the example I use down at the bottom, there is a school in Colorado Springs, and this was years ago. It was a classical academy, and I'm not going to name it, but when my son went there, their handbook stated, and this is, you know, kindergarten through 5th or 6th grade, their handbook stated that if a child is out of uniform, and out of uniform means having your uniform shirt on but not having it tucked in. Having, you know, being out of uniform means having your uniform shirt on but not having a belt on. So, I mean, they have a very strict, narrow idea of their uniform policy. And their handbook states if a child is repeatedly out of uniform, that the child will have to wear a scholar's robe around the school for a day. And that's their idea of love and logic. That's their logical consequence for a child being out of uniform. But I mean, I ended up pulling my son out of that school for a lot of reasons. But one was they tout high expectations, and I don't think it was high expectations, it was high pressure. There's a difference. But where's the logic? So what is the whole point of uniforms? To minimize distractions. What's the whole point of uniforms? To keep everybody kind of looking the same and on an equal playing field. Where is the logic in singling out a child and making him wear a scholar's robe for a day. That's a lot more distracting than a child who has his shirt untucked, who has his uniform on with his shirt untucked. That's a lot more distracting, and that does not even the playing field. It singles out a child and shames a child. So, it's called love and logic, or the logic trend, but I find that there's really no logical basis at all with these kinds of consequences. And feel free to jump in with questions, comments, thoughts, or your own stories, if you think of anything while we're discussing this.
But the one thing I think about immediately when you bring that up is the logic trend comes across so cold and so lacking in nurturance that it clearly violates the first principle that we have at Hope and Home and in Love to Nurture and in Core 1, which is your main goal is to have a emotionally safe environment for your child, and to have an environment where your child knows that you love them, have their back, and will take care of them. And that sense of feeling safe, emotionally safe, and loved is just ruptured when the parent says, "Forgot your lunch? That's a bad choice. Too bad. Bummer. You don't get lunch." And so suddenly you call in this example, you call your parent because you didn't get lunch, or you've left your lunch or your lunch money at home, and they give you kind of a cold, sarcastic, sucks to be you comment. And that, to a child whose primary relationship and bond is with you, is really harmful. And so we find that this kind of love and logic sometimes is even worse in terms of its impact on children than the authoritative, rigid, punitive. At least the authoritative, rigid, punitive shows a parent that cares. Maybe they act out in a way that we don't like to see, but they at least show they care. The logic trend tends to be cold and withdrawn and gives an impression that you don't matter.
Right. And one thing we teach in Discipline with Dignity, we added the dignity very intentionally, is that the dignity of the child is sacred. And children, although they don't have the same roles as adults, adults are clearly the leaders and the guides and the carers and the protectors, but children are still deserving of the same respect as adults. So put yourself in the situation where you have worked a long day, or you're at the office and you're racing against the clock to finish, a project before a deadline, and in your hurry to get to work, you dashed out the door and went off and left your credit card or left your wallet, and so you don't even have the ability to, call up Domino's because you don't have your credit card with you, and you call your spouse or friend, and say, I can't leave, I don't have time to go home to get it. I'm trying to finish this before the deadline. Is there any way you could drop something off or order, Jimmy John's for me and have it delivered or something? I mean, imagine how it would feel to you if your spouse or significant other or friend said, "Bummer, you chose to forget your lunch. I guess if you go hungry today, you'll choose to remember it tomorrow." Can you imagine? How would that go over? No. And so why do we think, that we are the supreme beings on the earth, that we do that to a child? Children are worthy of the same dignity and respect as adults. And a key to discipline with dignity, a key to handling conflict with kids, is being in touch with your own humanness and with your own tendency to make mistakes, and being able to extend the same grace that you'd extend to yourself, extend that to a child, and treat that child with the same dignity and respect you would want for yourself. Okay, moving over to flexible, nurturing, grace-based parenting. If you look in the textbook, this style is called the authoritative style, but this is the sweet spot of parenting. This is where Hope and Home falls. This is where Love to Nurture falls. This is where we are focusing our energy and attention today, on flexible, nurturing, grace-based parenting. You have enthusiastically involved parents, lots of verbal give and take, and so you have parents who are not threatened by a child who has his own ideas or his own will. You have parents who major in the majors. They let most stuff go because most stuff doesn't matter. If a kid wants to wear his Superman costume to the doctor, that is not a power struggle worth fighting, Let them wear their Superman costume to the doctor and get on board with it. Look at the overall picture of a child's life. For foster parents in particular, this is important. You might have kids in your home who were exposed to domestic violence, who might be, easily rattled or easily shaken. You might have kids who, have regressed a little bit because of all the stress in their lives. You may have, a 6 or 7 year old in your home who is, all of a sudden wetting the bed after he's been potty trained. A wise parent, an authoritative parent, Love to Nurture parent is going to be able to look at the overall picture of a child's life rather than just at the behavior, to get a clear picture of what's going on, so you understand the reason behind the behavior. Mistakes are viewed as an expected, normal part of life. Consequences are used sparingly with compassion and common sense. Emotional safety is a priority. What is emotional safety? What is emotional safety? It's the ability to allow children to experience a continuum of intense emotions without feeling threatened. It's allowing children to make mistakes without coming down hard on them and shaming them. It's the ability to put the relationship first and the behaviors second. One example of emotional safety that I can share with you is that of a foster mom who had adopted 2 girls from San Antonio years and years ago at the ages of 1 and 2. And at the ages of 1 and 2, they had already been sexually abused. So 10 years later, they had moved to Colorado. They wanted to get licensed as foster parents with Hope and Home. Their daughters are now 10 and 11. So she's going through these classes, and she is struggling a little bit. And I talked to her after class, and she's telling me about her daughter and how her 11-year-old in particular is just having a really hard time. I mean, impossible to get out the door in the morning, mad at the world, slamming doors, sarcastic, sulky, just not doing well. And she had her daughter in a, kind of a high-pressure school environment, and we'll get to that in a second. But the next week after class, I found this mom and checked in with her to see how things were going, and she said, good. She said, just this morning, we were having another morning where she was just mad at the world, didn't want to get dressed, didn't want to go to school, slamming doors, just being really, really impossible. She said, we got in the car finally, and we're heading to school, and she said, I thought about what we talked about in class, and she said, I did something I never thought I would be able to do. She said, normally I am a drill sergeant parent. I am a, parent that's like, get over it, get with the program, deal with it, you know, just deal with it. But she said, I did something I've never done. She said, I said to my daughter, I said, I don't know what's going on with you, but I know that you're hurting and you need some mom time. So I am going to drop your sister off, and you and I are going to go home, and I'll make you whatever you want for breakfast, and we're gonna have some mom and daughter time. So that's what she did. And you know, in the space of taking the pressure off, in the space of saying, I don't know what's going on, but you need some mom time, creating that emotional safety, the daughter disclosed that she was being bullied at school. And you remember how I mentioned that these, you know, babies had been sexually abused at the ages of 1 and 2 already. You know, now they're 11 and 12. We know that sexual abuse, early exposure to pornography even can trigger early puberty. And so this 11-year-old was far more developed than all the other girls her age at school. And she was being bullied for it. And so her mom was able to go to the school, get involved, and it turns out she was just barely scratching the surface. There was a lot more going on, you know, once she got involved, and ultimately she pulled her daughter out of the school because it wasn't a safe place for her. But that is an example of emotional safety. It's an example of putting the relationship above accountability, above behavior. One thing Ross says is, you don't sacrifice emotional safety on the altar of accountability. And this mom was able to flex her natural parenting style. She was able to flex who she was to meet the needs of her daughter in that moment. And what would she have missed out on if she had not taken a step back and let go of the cultural expectations to get to school on time and deal with it? I mean, she had to let go of the cultural expectations of children need to show respect, children need to, you know, have good attitudes. She had to let go of all that. But look what it did. It opened a door into her daughter's world that she never would have had otherwise. And she was able to get involved. And we know too that bullying is a health crisis. I mean, kids as young as 8 and 9 years old take their own lives when they're being bullied. And so it's possible that this mom saved her daughter's life just by implementing and putting into practice the principles of emotional safety and flexible nurturing and grace-based parenting. Permissive, indulgent, permissive, uninvolved, we're not going to spend time on. Those are pretty self-explanatory. We want to spend the bulk of our time today on flexible, nurturing, grace-based parenting.
One of the things I would say, though, about permissive, indulgent, permissive, uninvolved, is that we often see that the far right of the spectrum and the far left of the spectrum are at war with each other. And at the far right, you have authoritarian, rigid, authoritarian, punitive. At the far left, you have permissive and indulgent. And both of them somehow are usually reactions to the opposite. So it's not uncommon to have a child, have a parent who is very permissive and very indulgent. They're best friends with their kids. And when you say something to them about maybe you need to move a little bit to the center, their response is, what, you want me to be like my father who is, you know, rigid and mean and, you know, my way or the highway? They don't see the whole middle ground. Equally, I have talked with parents who are authoritarian, and you talk to them about moving to the middle zone, and their immediate response is, oh, you want to be like my parents who would just let kids do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. And so both of these tend to be reactive stances born out of not wanting to be somebody that they know on the other end of the scale. So part of our challenge is to get people to understand that moving to the center is not giving everything up. You don't have to become wildly permissive and uninvolved to not be rigid and authoritarian. Equally, when we ask a permissive, uninvolved parent to start moving to the center and being a little more authoritative, we're not asking them to become abusive. So it's real important when you're in this, when you're in one of those stances, we're not asking you to completely abandon where you are and go to the opposite. There is middle ground in the middle.
So, having discussed the parenting styles, hang on to this handout and look at it a little bit more in depth when you have more time. And just keep this in mind as we go forward today. We're going to go back to the timeout trap, and we're going to do a developmental snapshot on this age group to kind of get what's going on with him developmentally and going on with his brain. So we can kind of unpack how might this mom have handled it in a more adaptive, effective way. So this is a 4-year-old who's been in foster care. We know that he was exposed to domestic violence and he was exposed to drugs in utero. Let's look at what's going on developmentally, though. We know that the brain develops from the bottom up, back to front, right to left. And so somebody remind me, what is the magical age that your car insurance rates drop drastically? 25. Has anybody in here not hit 25 yet? Everybody 25? Okay. 25 is that magical age, and that's not just an arbitrary number. There's science behind that, because the brain is not fully developed until sometime in the mid-20s. The brain remains plastic and flexible throughout life, but the thinking, rational logic, the ability to predict risk, the consequential thinking, it doesn't come to full fruition until sometime in the mid-20s. So if you think about your own life, for example, think about yourself as a 25 or 26-year-old versus a 20 or 21-year-old. Even at 20 and 21, you were probably a lot more impulsive, a lot more spontaneous, just a lot more living in the moment than you are at 25 and 26. At 25 and 26, you're a safer driver because those areas of your brain have come to full fruition and continue to grow into full fruition throughout life. So having said that, knowing that, our brains take decades to really, get to that place, get to that mature place, it gives us a sense of patience and frustration tolerance when little kids, are in the throes of their tantrums. Why? Because the feeling center develops before the thinking center. So kids at 4, kids at 2, 3, 4, 5 often are going to feel things very intensely, but they're not going to have the verbal skills and the rationale to put the brakes on those feelings. As adults, we can journal when we're really upset, when we have really intense feelings. We can call a friend when we have really intense feelings. We can go for a walk. We can go for a drive. We can, use our thinking center to look at our situation from a different perspective. We can accurately identify our feelings. We can identify the shades of feelings that we experience. So we have all these coping skills at our fingertips just because our brains are fully developed. And little kids don't have those coping skills. So they're going to feel things really intensely without having the coping skills to name the feelings, and to think about it from a different perspective. You know, there's not any child who's 4 who's going to sit in timeout and say, wow, you're right, Mom. That's a good way to think about this. I really was out of line when I did that. You're right. No child's gonna think that way. They're just gonna sit in timeout, you know, and wait until it's over. And there may be some connection, but it's not teaching them the lessons that we want to teach them. So in this case,
Before you go on, one of the things I want to emphasize what we just said is as a result of the fact that they learn to feel before they learn to think or to process, what we know then is that the traditional models of therapy and psychotherapy for adults are not only ineffective with little children, but they're counterintuitive, because you realize when we're doing when most of you have been to therapy or seen therapy or been involved in therapy, either yourself or with a peer or with a child, an adolescent, you see what's called cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's kind of interesting to hear that, cognitive behavioral. So a therapist helps us to understand what we're doing, and then we put it into words, and then once we kind of understand it cognitively, then we have the ability to reshape our behavior based on what we've learned. Well, kids work the other way around. They don't think about it first, and then it affects their feelings are coming first. So when we try and tell them to think about what you're feeling, we're putting their cart in front of their horse. I know one of our foster parents who's a Head Start teacher, Olivia Fisher, often starts with just a chart of different expressions and words that go with them, so they can even begin to identify, am I mad, am I sad, am I hungry, am I upset, am I hurt? Because those words have yet to be associated with those feelings yet.
yeah.
So when we as adults try to apply cognitive behavioral therapy and get them to cognitively understand what it is that they're doing, we are barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah, exactly. And just like what Olivia Fisher does, she uses feeling faces with little kids who can't read yet. And you can make those with paper plates and popsicle sticks. You can print them off Pinterest, you know, so kids can point to the face that they're feeling and identify with that. And so then, you know, as a parent, it gives you something to work with so that you can comfort that feeling or meet that need that's under the behavior. So in this case, this 4-year-old boy used language that, I mean, you know, nobody uses, you know, especially on an everyday basis, especially with somebody you care about. I mean, we don't use language like this with people we don't like. And so this 4-year-old had just been exposed to that in his bio home, and we don't know what kind of response he got to that. I mean, he was comfortable saying it. So it makes me wonder, did his bio parents think it was cute when he would say it? Did they think it was funny? Did they just treat it, you know, like he said good morning? Like it's just normal, run-of-the-mill vocabulary in their home? We don't know. But whenever he used it with this foster mom, he got a very different response than he did in his bio home. And you can imagine kind of the shock and horror, you know, any of us would feel to hear that come out of a little child's mouth. But what could this foster mom have done to handle this differently, having, you know, looked at the parenting styles, you know, looking at the overall picture of a child's life? What are some ideas you have, Ross, about how this mom might have handled this differently?
Well, I think you're right in terms of saying this was common language where the child came from, and he's certainly modeling, he or she is certainly modeling what they've heard before. So the first thing is for the foster parent not to take it personally.
Yeah.
She's really not being told off by someone in the most vile way. The child is simply mimicking or repeating words he's used before. And so not taking it personally is the very first step.
Yeah.
Second of all, what we know about children is they are reinforced by strong reactions. So if you react really strong, positively or negatively, you're going to hear it again. And so to try and minimize the use of that word as opposed to turning it into a huge reaction would be one of the things I would say. But at the same time, letting the child know it's not something that's acceptable. We don't talk like that. And then moving as quickly as possible to something else and get out of that situation. Avoid a power struggle at all costs and not personalize it, but also not think that it really says something about the child. It's not, this child must be a mean child, or this child must be a nasty child, or a bad child. Child is simply mimicking words he's heard.
Yeah, and I would add, you know, in addition to not taking it personally, you know, definitely acknowledging and correcting, you know, and coaching and saying, those words are grown-up words, and most grown-ups don't even use those words. So I really don't want to hear you use those words again. They are really bad words. And so describe the badness as the words and not the badness as the child. Make sure there's a differentiation there. And then also give him words to use instead. So, you know, you can say, if you're mad, you can say, I'm mad at you, Mommy. If you are hurt, you can say, you hurt my feelings, Mommy. And give him words to say in place. If you tell him to do something and he doesn't want to do it, give him vocabulary to say that in a way that's appropriate. I would rather not put my shoes on now, Mommy. Or, can we wait just a minute, Mommy? So feed him and spoon feed him the words that he can use in place. So yes, address it matter-of-factly, don't take it personally, and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, the words don't have the same meaning for the child that they have for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's a mistake that we sometimes make.
Yeah.
I once watched a study done where they hooked somebody up to a polygraph and used a lot of different words with them. And they said the exact same cuss words in something like 12 different languages. And the 11 languages that the person didn't know had no reaction. The one language the person does know, huge reaction. And that's the kind of obvious expectation of a study like that. But what it proved to us is that we attach values to words. So words like FUB have intense word feeling to us, whereas for the child, it could be any word.
He could have been thinking he was being funny.
It has no meaning to him, right.
And so you can imagine, you know, if he was accustomed to getting a positive response or no response when he uses these words, you can imagine kind of his dismay and shock and surprise whenever the mom responded so strongly. Another thing to keep in mind with traumatized children is often they were isolated with their abusers, and so time out might re-traumatize them. There are good alternatives to time out, such as time in or a comfort corner. If they're getting overstimulated or worked up, you know, a lot of parents will put soft blankets and pillows and books in a corner, and they'll go sit in that comfort corner with the child to help him calm down. Another thing to keep in mind is that although some traumatized children may be re-traumatized by the isolation of timeout, that's not every child. And so some children will seek alone time to calm down and to regulate themselves. And so we can give them that space. My son, for example, from the time he was 3 and 4, if we had, you know, a conflict or disagreement, he could stomp off and go to his room for a few minutes, however long he wanted. It was not me sending him to his room. It was not me putting him in timeout. That was just his kind of intuitive way of calming himself down, was kind of getting out of the situation, changing the scenery and going to his room. So when kids do initiate alone time, in the heat of a conflict, we need to allow them to have that and not stomp after them and shame them for walking away while they're talking to us. That's their way of self-regulating.
And one other thing about this that's kind of interesting, you have it set up in round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4, round 5. The goal of any intervention is to change behavior. And so what we have to look at is, does the child understand with the original timeout that it's the consequence for saying FUB? Maybe. But I can guarantee you that is lost by the time we get to round 2, round 3, certainly by round 4, and by round 5. At that point, we're just in a power struggle.
Yeah.
That child has no awareness in round 2, 3, 4, or 5 that this still has anything at all to do with the language he used.
Yeah.
So it's not teaching anything.
Yeah, it's become a power struggle that the mom has to win. And how do we know when time out is not working? Whenever the behavior continues to deteriorate, when the emotions escalate, and whenever the parent continues upping the ante. Whenever a parent is upping the ante to make a punishment or a consequence effective, that needs to be a key to the parent to walk away, change your strategy. Because at this point, the child's not learning anything. It's only creating intense emotional distance between you. So that's why we call it the timeout trap. It goes along with what Ross teaches in Kids in Crisis, the bigger hammer. And it doesn't have to be limited to the timeout trap. Parents, we've seen, they might take away, TV for an evening. And then, that doesn't help. And so they take away the phone, and then they take away, anything in the child's room. And before you know it, the kid doesn't have anything in his room but a mattress. And so that's the bigger hammer concept, that parents continue to up the ante and try to make the punishment or consequence more unpleasant in an effort to get the desired behavior. And at that point, the lesson's lost. It's a signal for the parent to walk away, regulate herself. Moms need to regulate too, and if moms need to walk away and take a mommy timeout or just let it go for a while, you can. I think it's a myth sometimes that, behavior has to be corrected like right there on the spot. What's more important is for mom to be regulated and clear-headed to be able to address it. And so it can be much more effective, if you're just like reeling from the shock of hearing these words come out of a child's mouth. It's more effective for you to just not say a word. Walk away, call a friend, call your husband, think it through, calm down, and then reapproach the situation whenever you are clear-headed.
See, I think that is one of the most important elements of timeout. When I used to run a residential treatment center, we had timeout. And it really was for the reasons you said, to create a regulated, clear-headed break. And so the main purpose of timeout, in my opinion, is to stop a process and allow everybody to get re-regulated and everybody to get clear-headed again. And so timeout could be, let's just go for a walk. Let's leave whatever it is that's frustrating us alone and not do that anymore. If we're fighting over something, let's just take a time out and stop fighting over this. By the way, this works with grown-ups too. For some reason,
Exactly.
for some reason, timeout has gotten confused with serving hard time in prison.
Yeah.
Hard time in prison is an actual consequence that, wow, I'm losing part of my life because I did something bad. That's not what we're doing with little kids. We're not trying to teach them through a consequence of not being able to be in society. What we're doing instead is giving a literal timeout to a process. So the best use of timeout is simply to get outside of whatever is going on and do something different.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes people will say, but isn't that reinforcing the negative behavior? Let's say two kids are fighting and you say, let's just separate and do some other more fun things. It's like, well, but you're reinforcing that. No, stop that. That's
You're
just,
redirecting.
You're just redirecting. And with young kids, redirecting and giving them a timeout from each other. If two kids are fighting, a timeout from fighting with you. The most important thing is what you just said. It's an opportunity to get re-regulated and to be clear-headed. And then we can move forward.
Yeah, it's just a reset button. It's not designed, I mean, I don't think timeout is effective when it's used in a way to make something unpleasant for the
Exactly.
child. It's just, you know, a way to reset.
And so, in fact, time in works just as well, if not better, right?
That's what I'm advocating, is that time in can be a lot more effective. Just a change of scenery, sensory comfort, soft blankets, soft pillows for younger kids especially. Yeah.
And sometimes older kids.
Yeah, I
Sensory
mean,
blankets
yeah,
and soft
teens,
pillows.
teens will put themselves in timeout, and I don't really like that language, but that's how we all regulate sometimes. Is we just need some space and we need some time alone in our rooms, and I think it's a mistake for parents to take it personally when a teen stomps off and goes to his room and slams his door. He's self-regulating, and so you have a great example that you use with Kelsey stomping off and going to her room.
That's my
I'm gonna share
25-year-old,
that.
but it
I know,
really-
but she was a teenager.
She was a teenager at the time, and I'll run through that story real quickly, but it's an important one. My daughter got into an argument with her mom, and in the living room, and it escalated to the point of shouting. And then my daughter, Kelsey, stomped down the hallway, went to her bedroom, slammed the door, and the picture frame in the hallway goes crashing down to the floor and breaks. And my wife was all the way out of the couch on her way down there. And if things had progressed as they normally do, she would have gotten to the room, yanked open the door, and continued the fight. And it would have gone something like this. She would have said, you know, how dare you slam that door? We don't slam doors in this house. Get up right now and close this appropriately. To which my daughter would probably say, I'm not closing the door, or something stupid like that, you know. And then the comment would be made like, well, you broke the frame in the doorway or in the hallway. And to which my daughter would say, you care more about that than you care about me. It just becomes this ridiculous and kind of awkward, silly battle that ends up with a lot of bruised feelings. And so I grabbed my wife's arm and said, hang on, let's just stop for a moment. Let's us take a time out. Let's get re-regulated. Let's get clear thinking. Let's not just build this fight. And so she did. She sat down, and we let a few minutes went by. And I kind of imagined my daughter in the bedroom going, what's going on? Because she kind of expected someone to come bursting through the door, and nobody did. And so eventually I went and knocked on her door, and she said, what? And I said, can I talk to you? And she said, no. And it was important to me that I knock on the door because I'm showing her respect and that this is her room, and I don't come in without knocking. And so I waited a few seconds later, knocked on the door again, said, can I come in? And she says, why? I said, I just want to talk. She says, okay, grudgingly. Now let's keep in mind, we talk about power differentials. I own the house. Okay, I own every space around her room. She can't be there forever. I control the lines of supply. I control the food, the water. I mean, eventually she's coming out. So I know I'm going to win this battle. I don't have to force my way in. So at that point, I go in. I sit at the very edge of her bed, again, in a very humble position, not standing over her, being respectful. And I said, how are you doing? And she's like, you know, obviously really crappy. And then I said, you know, I'm really sorry. So I began by apologizing, which most people would think is crazy, but I am sorry. I wasn't sorry for some things, but I was sorry that the night had gotten kind of out of control and crappy. And I told her that I'm sorry things had gotten like this because I was really looking forward to a good night. And that opened up the conversation. We started talking. And as we started to talk, she started opening up about her day and how she realized that she had a crappy day and she was taking it out on us and she was yelling at us, but it wasn't really about us. And we had just kind of gotten in the way, and she lost her temper. And so she's basically now kind of reflecting, understanding, interpreting. And at that point in time, she said, what picture broke? Because she heard the picture break in the hallway. I said, Grandma. And she said, of course, it had to be Grandma. I said, yeah. And she says, well, I'll pay for it. And I said, great. I'll drive us down to Hobby Lobby, and together we can fix it. Then she gets real quiet and she says, is Mom still mad? Yep. What do you think we should do about that? And she's like, and we start talking. Well, the key to this is let's compare the two potential scenarios. One scenario is we stomp right in on top of her, violate her dignity, continue the battle going for some sense of purpose. I don't know what it is. But I later asked my wife, I said, what was it like when I asked you to sit down? She says, well, I felt like I was being a bad mom. I felt like a good mom would not just sit there and take it. Interesting. So what ended up happening was, instead of just having a fight that went on forever, okay, and ended up with people just stomping off and probably making accusations or punishments that they can't keep. So like it could have continued with my wife saying things like, well, fine, you're grounded for a year, stupid things like that. But it would have ended up in a very bad way. By doing it very differently, by empowering her instead of overpowering her, by showing her dignity, by using a timeout in a good way for both of us, we were able to connect, converse. She was able to take responsibility, and the outcome was much better. Later on that evening, we were able to have dinner together, play cards, have a good night. We were able to get beyond it. So by avoiding the power struggle that you're talking about, by taking a timeout on both sides, us waiting a few minutes, her waiting a few minutes, what we did was create an environment where ultimately she could grow up a little bit, where she could realize her behavior was out of control, realize it was wrong to slam the door, realize it was wrong to damage somebody else's property, realize it was wrong to damage somebody else's property. And in doing so, she grew up a little bit. And that's ultimately our job as parents, is help kids grow up, because that won't be the last time she's frustrated with someone. Won't be the last time she wants to slam a door. Won't be the last time that she accidentally breaks somebody else's property. But what we've done is given her an opportunity to grow and learn and develop, so that the next time she does something like that, whether it's with a roommate or a husband or her own children, she has a better way of dealing with it. Had we stomped in on her, we would have robbed her from the opportunity to self-correct. Let me say that again. Had we stomped in on her, we would have robbed her from the ability to self-correct. And that's what ultimately we want our kids to do, right? We want them to be self-correcting adolescents and ultimately self-correcting adults that can catch themselves making these mistakes and deal with it themselves. We don't want to spend the rest of our lives consequencing our kids.
I love that story, Russ. I think it really captures the essence of giving kids the ability to self-reflect on their behavior and give them the opportunity to make it right and to self-correct. Whenever kids do get escalated, not only having like the feeling faces or feeling word sheet for older kids to help them identify their feelings, is the power of parents validating their kids' feelings. That does not mean you are condoning punching a hole in the wall or kicking a sibling, you know, but you can validate the feelings by saying it's okay to be mad, it's not okay to hit. It's okay to be mad, it's not okay to punch a hole in the wall. You know, at one point in my life, I went into the living room and sat down and picked up the Dave Ramsey book that my husband was reading, and it fell open to the page on budgeting, and I just shut it down and I just put it aside, and I was like, I don't even want to talk about budgeting. Oh, I hate the idea. It just, you know, just totally turned me off. So I just set the book down, and I expected to get a lecture from him I expected for him to talk about the virtues of budgeting, but instead he looked at me and he was like, it's okay. Some people don't like budgeting. That's fine. You know, we just, you know, we can work with that. You know, you don't have to budget if you're not a person who naturally wants to budget. And then I was like, huh, okay, maybe I am a little bit open to it now. But if he had lectured me, I would have just become more resolute. And so one of my favorite quotes comes from Peter Levine and Maggie Klein in Trauma Through a Child's Eyes. They say feelings change once felt. So even with little kids who are having intense feelings and tantrums and emotions, just giving them permission to feel those feelings, validating them, letting them know that you get it and that it's okay, can paradoxically help them release those intense feelings. Moving on, we want to go into Zoondoogles now. And that's one thing that we had gotten some feedback on that some of our foster parents wanted more training on, was how to use Zoondoogles. And so we're just going to watch a short video now, and then I have a handout to give to you with some tips on how to get the most of Zoondoogles.
You say it Zoomdoogle. Z U O M D. A Zoomdoogle is a kind of money, only yellow or purple, and they only have 5s or 1s.
So most teenagers think that they're too old for Zoondoogles, but I think it's a good way for us to act like little kids and enjoy hanging out with the younger ones also.
I like the Zoomdoogles because they're the best thing in the universe.
Zoondoogles are as much for parents as they are for kids. As parents, it can be really easy to get focused on everything the kid's doing wrong. And it can be easy for parents to miss opportunities when kids are really doing well. And there was a study of teachers who had particularly disruptive students in their classroom. And for 2 weeks, the teachers ignored the disruptive behavior. And whenever they did catch the kid doing well, whether it was sitting quietly working at his desk or taking turns on the playground, they would make a point to go over to the kid and pat him on the shoulder, or, you know, give him a warm rub on the back, and coupled with a verbal affirmation such as, thank you so much, you are doing so well, playing nicely with other kids, or you're doing so well paying attention today. And the point is, they used nurturing touch to provide a double reinforcement. They provided a verbal affirmation with nurturing touch while ignoring the disruptive behaviors. And within 2 weeks, the disruptive behaviors disappeared. So Zoondoogles are a tangible reminder for parents to catch kids doing well. And as parents, we can't focus on perfection when we're expecting kids to do well. Kids are still learning. For example, if kids have been out playing with Play-Doh at the dining table, and to your surprise, they put the Play-Doh up without being asked. There may be still, little bits and pieces of Play-Doh on the table or on the floor, and maybe the lids aren't fully snapped on. The fact is, they took the initiative to finish what they started and to put the Play-Doh up, and they're taking care of their things. And that is a really good opportunity to say, thank you so much. I'm so impressed that you remembered to put the lids on and put the Play-Doh up so it doesn't dry out. And because you just were so thoughtful and conscientious, I want to give you a Zundugal for that. And couple that with some type of nurturing touch, whether it's a pat on the back or a rub on the shoulder, just a brief nurturing touch. And I know in foster care, a lot of times kids don't like to be touched, or they have sensory integration issues. And if you have a child like that who kind of cringes whenever you touch them, find other ways to provide nurturing touch whenever you deliver those Zundugals, whether it's a high five or a pounder, some way to connect with them, because it provides a very powerful reinforcer when you use verbal affirmation, nurturing touch, and follow up with a Zundugal. Well, let's roll up our sleeves and talk about how to use Zundugals in everyday parenting situations. And at Hope and Home, we're not going to micromanage how you use Zundugals, but we do want to provide some general guidelines. There are a couple of ways that you can use Zundugals whenever you're working with kids. One is to use Zundugals strategically over time to shape a particular behavior. One thing you want to remember, if you use it in this way, is you pick one behavior to work on for 2 or 3 months. You don't come up with a long list of 5 things that you need to work on for the next 2 or 3 months. If you're going to use them strategically over time, pick one thing, the most important thing on your list. So if a child is having trouble playing well with other children. So another way to use Zundugals is on the spot, in very short-term situations when kids need a little bit more motivation to do well in a certain situation. For example, my kids 90% of the time do very well when we go out to eat. But sometimes, whether it's because they're tired, or because we picked a bad time of day to go out to eat, sometimes they might need a little bit more encouragement and motivation to stay in their seat, keep their hands to themselves, and use their manners. And in those situations, I can say, guys, I want you to use your manners, stay in your seat, keep your hands to yourself, and I'll give you Zundugals when we get in the car. And if you keep Zundugals in your wallet as a parent, you have them at all times for any type of situation like that. A rule of thumb with using Zundugals and rewards is the younger the child, the more short-term and the more immediate the reward needs to be. So for preschoolers and even school-age kids up to 6 or 7, keep it very simple, very achievable, very immediate. They have a poor concept of time and can't envision waiting 2 or 3 weeks until they've saved up 200 Zundugals to get to go out for ice cream. Make it achievable. So for 3 to 6 or 7-year-olds, you can say, whenever you guys have 15 or 20 Zundugals, we can go out for ice cream. And finally, I want to close with Hebrews 10:24. Hebrews 10:24 says, let us consider how we can spur one another on to love and good deeds. And that's really ultimately what we're doing with Zundugals. We're trying to encourage kids to express respect for other people, to show love to other people, and to do well, even in little things in life. And as parents, when we think about Hebrews 10:24, let us consider. Consider carries a lot of weight. Consider means ponder, understand, be attentive. And whenever we talk about motivating kids to do well, we have to understand what motivates them, understand who they're called to be, understand their temperaments, understand their weaknesses, and ultimately encourage them to do well when they can without expecting perfection, and completely understanding that they're kids, they're gonna make mistakes, they're learning, they've had a rough start in life, and as parents, the most powerful place of healing for a traumatized child in foster care is within the context of a loving, warm, nurturing, responsive relationship with you. And we want to use Zundoogles to enhance that, and we want to use Zundoogles to encourage kids. So the last segment of this class is going to do with collaborative problem solving. And we spent some time going over the timeout trap and gave you some ideas about how to work with younger kids. Collaborative problem solving is something that can be effective with kids who are verbal and kids who have school age, middle school, and high school. And one thing that Ross teaches in his book, Kids in Crisis, is there are 3 modes that parents can use with their kids: command, collaborate, and consign. And we're going to focus again on the collaborate mode. Another author who has what I call a companion book to Love to Nurture is Ross Greene, and his book is called The Explosive Child, and he also breaks it down into 3 modes, except he calls it Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. Same concepts, but his Plan B is called collaborative problem solving. So we're focusing in Love to Nurture terms on the collaborate mode that Ross Wright talks about, and in Ross Greene's terms, we are looking at collaborative problem solving. And the principles of collaborative problem solving go right back to what we talked about in the very, very beginning. It's about empowering kids versus overpowering. It's about getting their buy-in when it comes to solving a problem or changing a behavior or figuring out what's going on. So we want to get kids' involvement and kids' buy-in. And so what's easy for parents to do is it's easy for us to lecture, it's easy for us to preach, and it's easy for us to come up with the way to solve the problem. But that's not really effective with getting kids buy-in and kids involvement. So we are gonna do a role play now on collaborative problem solving. And what I like about Ross Greene's approach is that it actually gives us some language, some common language to use with kids whenever we're tackling a problem together. So again, the key to collaborative problem solving is to wait until the heat of the moment is gone. You cannot have this conversation when a child is escalated or upset or angry, because at this point the thinking center of his brain is hijacked and it's lost and it's futile. So the key to having this conversation is timing. So maybe in the car, one evening on the way home, whenever it's dark and there's not a lot of distractions and it's just the 2 of you in the car. Maybe, after homework is done and he's just winding down before he goes to bed. Picking the right time is going to be essential for this conversation to go well. We can't have this conversation whenever the parent is escalated and worked up, and we can't have it whenever the kid is worked up. So picking the right time when everybody's calm is going to be key. Okay, so I'm the parent, and I'm going to initiate a conversation with my child. I've noticed we've been struggling a lot over homework lately. What's up?
It's too hard.
It's too hard. Which part is too hard?
It's too much.
It's too much. I don't understand. What's too much?
The writing part is too much.
Ah, the writing part is too much. Is the writing part hard on everything?
No,
On what parts of your homework is the writing part too much?
I don't know.
Well, take your time. We're not in a rush.
It's not the spelling. All I have to do is write one word.
So that's not it.
And it's not the social studies. All I have to do is draw a line from one word to another. It's the science part. Miss Moore is making us write entire paragraphs, and it's too hard.
Ah, it's the science homework. Yes, Mrs. Moore is making you write entire paragraphs.
It's too much and it's too hard.
Well, I'm glad we're figuring this out, but I'm still a little confused. What is it about the writing entire paragraphs that is so hard for you?
You know I'm a slow writer. It takes me so long to write the words that I forget what I wanted to say. So then I just get all mad and I stop doing my homework.
So it takes you so long to write the words that you forget what you wanted to say. I understand. The thing is, if you stop doing your homework completely, then you won't get any practice at the writing, and it will always be hard for you.
I wonder if there's a way for us... Oh, that's still you.
Oh, sorry. Where were we? Okay. Then you won't get any practice at writing, and it will always be hard for you. I wonder if there's a way for us to help you with the writing part so it doesn't take so long and make you so mad, but still gives you some practice at it so it won't always be so hard for you. Do you have any ideas?
No.
Well, take your time. We've never really talked about it like this before. If you don't have any ideas, maybe I can come up with some.
If we could just come up with a way for me to remember when I wanted to write, then maybe I wouldn't get so frustrated.
Let's think about that. How could we help you remember what you wanted to write?
At school, sometimes they have someone scribe for me.
I know. Well, the last time you asked if I could scribe for you, they said they wanted you to practice your writing on your homework. Of course, they don't know what we go through every night around here during homework. I could ask them again, but I wonder if there's any other way we could help you remember what you wanted to write.
I could say what I wanted to write into your voice recorder. You know how you do that for work? Then I could just play the recording back and write it down.
That could work. That would make it easier for you to remember what you want to write?
I think so.
Well, it sounds like that solution works for you, and it certainly works for me. I don't use my voice recorder when you're doing your homework, so it sounds realistic. Shall we give it a try?
Okay.
And if that solution doesn't work, we'll talk some more and come up with one that does.
Okay. Thanks, Mom.
Okay. Okay, stay here. So what are some of the themes, what are some of the themes you noticed?
You're working with them to problem solve.
Working with them to problem solve. What else did you notice? Not necessarily themes, but what else did you notice? Reflective listening. That's basically repeating back everything they say.
I felt like you were empowering me.
Empowering. What else? What else did you notice? What else jumped out at you about this role play?
Or I need to. You ask for her input before like giving your ideas.
Asked for her input before giving my ideas. Yeah.
Well, the other thing is that this can be really embarrassing for a child. And the way that you helped me problem solve it wasn't embarrassing and it wasn't shaming.
Yeah. Do you know how easy it would have been for me to say, you know, at this part, let's kind of role play this again, and I will take the role of traditional parent.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to attempt this role play, but I'm going to blow it. Okay? So I've noticed we've been struggling a lot over homework lately. What's up?
It's too hard.
It's too hard. What part's too hard?
I don't know. It's too much.
What's too much?
I'm not sure. The writing part?
You've been writing since you were 5. What's so hard about that?
I still can't do it.
I know, but you're 10 years old now. What can't you not do? I mean, you know how to write.
I don't know. It's so hard.
Can you tell me what is so hard about writing? I mean, it's a basic skill you've been doing.
I'm trying though.
What's hard about it though?
I try the words. It's not spelling. I don't know.
I mean, what's so hard about it? I mean, you've been writing since you were 5, and you have the same homework every night. I don't understand why you can't just do it.
Well, why can't you teach me better?
I can sit there with you and I can, you know, write with you, but the teachers have told me they don't want me writing it for you. So I don't know what you want me to do.
Well, I can't do it then.
Well, you're gonna have to do it. I mean, maybe I can set a timer. And if I set a timer, like 10 minutes you have to do one subject and then we move on to the next subject, let's try that.
Fine.
What a difference, right? What a difference. I mean, did I have her buy-in at all? Was I treating her with dignity and respect? Was I, being considerate or asking, like really getting into the problem to find out what was wrong?
No.
Yeah. And so what I love about this role play and this language is that, if you stick with it and truly have the patience, to let the child speak and identify it, you really can get somewhere. And I've used it with my son very effectively. But I think the temptation for parents is going to be not to jump in and try to problem solve for the child. Because children can, identify the problem. They can identify, that detail of what the problem is, forgetting what you were going to write because it takes you so long.
And the difference, I think, even just in a role play, is not feeling the pressure. Like, I have to figure this out or else I'm in trouble or they're going to be mad at me.
Yes, and I love that too, because several times the parent says, take your time, we're not in a rush. So the parent is not putting pressure on him. The parent's repeating everything back to the child. And the parent saying, I wonder if there's a way, for us to help you. Do you have any ideas?
See, and in the second scenario, it felt like it's my fault, as opposed to there's a problem that we can solve, or that I can even solve. But in the second one, it was like, this is my fault, so there's nothing I can really do.
Yeah, and it was emotionally charged. And see, like this, when you stick to like the plan, you take that emotional charge out of it. And so that's hard too for parents, but I know parents can do it if they can just take their time and practice it. It's going to take practice for parents. The other thing I love is that they come up with a solution. That was the child's idea, and the last thing the parent says on page 111, the parent says, and if that doesn't work, we'll talk some more and come up with one that does. We'll talk some more and come up with one that does. So again, the parent's taking the pressure off. He's not like making the child sign a contract that that's what we're going to do every night until the homework's done. He's saying, okay, we'll try this. It's more like approaching it like it's an experiment. And if it doesn't work, they just go back to the drawing board. So it takes that emotional charge out of it and takes the pressure off the child, because if the parent's pressuring the child, it makes the child feel scared. I mean, you like literally kind of shied away from me when I was saying, what do you mean it's so hard? You've been writing since you were 5. Right. But you can see how easy it would be for a parent to jump in and try to problem solve like that. Thank you. Collaborative problem solving. What are your other observations or thoughts about that?
I notice patience. I don't know. I mean, I know it's a tough thing for people to have, especially as a parent, but you would sense that your patience was giving her confidence.
The language is, I've noticed, fill in the blank, what's up. If you can just start the conversation off in that way, I've noticed, what's up. And then, the child was just like, I don't know. A lot of parents would just give up at that point and say, well, it doesn't work. But the parent gently persisted. Well, take your time. I mean, we've never talked about it like this, be comfortable with silence. I've noticed, what's up? Repeat the question if you need to. But starting a conversation off like that in the right moment can empower the child. It can make the child feel respected by you. And it can do wonders for your relationship. I mean, this is another example of emotional safety like we talked about before.
I think that was an excellent role play, and I think it really does demonstrate how important it is for us to work with kids as opposed to against kids, for us to collaborate with them as opposed to just laying down the law.
Yeah, I mean, and Ross Greene's book really is a companion book to your book, Kids in Crisis. I mean, I explained that before, but one thing that you really talk about a lot in your book is getting kids buy-in, and how important it is for kids to have some involvement in, you know, how their lives work and how their lives run.
Exactly. I think it's critical to get kids buy-in. Think about it from your own perspective. If somebody coerces you to do something and you're not bought into it, that coercion may work for that moment, but it certainly won't be long lasting. And the same thing is true with children. If we coerce children to do things, they may do them in front of us. They may do them in that one instance, maybe whenever we're around to do them. But if they don't personally buy into it, then it's not something that they want to do, and it's not something that they see the value in doing. So our job as grown-ups is to impart to our children a sense of why we do the things that we do, not just how to do the things we do. Because once they understand why we do this, then they hopefully internalize it, and they do it for the right reasons down the road. A couple of quick examples of this. When I was running a residential treatment center, we insisted that there was a group activity that the staff and the kids would do every quarter. And the reason we did this was that residential treatment programs are by nature oppositional. For whatever reasons, there becomes this animosity between staff and kids. And kids become the counterculture, or the rebel alliance, and they perceive the staff as the Death Star, and they, you know, as the bad guys, as Darth Vader and the stormtroopers. And you get this dissonance, and that plays out sometimes in parents and kids, teachers and students. Whenever there's a hierarchy with one group in charge of another, you see this dissonance. It even happens in workplaces with management and staff, that they can become oppositional, and they can start having a counterculture and talking very negatively about each other, and depersonalizing each other. And when we start to depersonalize each other, then it's they are doing this, they are acting like this, as opposed to a real person with real behaviors. And we want to break down that dehumanization that occurs between parents and kids, staff and employees, staff and management. And one of the best ways of doing it is through collaboration. So when I ran a treatment center, every quarter we had some activity we're doing. And the very first one that we did was a talent show. We had 78 kids in residential care. We had 32 kids in a hospital. We had 50 kids in a day treatment program. And these were the toughest kids from all over the nation that were coming to this program. And when I rolled this out to the staff, I had a strong reaction that this was a terrible idea, because they were all caught up in, you know, medication is the cure, behavioral modification is a cure, quiet rooms, authority is the cure. And when I brought this up, it seemed very, very threatening to the staff. But we went through with it, and what they realized was when kids are busy building sets, when kids are busy trying on costumes and practicing lines, they're not busy planning an escape route. They're not busy trying to figure out how to get a hold of contraband, cigarettes, drugs, alcohol. They're not busy trying to come up with strategies to jump the staff and do bad things. So we create alliance through these kinds of collaboration. And so every single quarter we had something like that. And what happened was the overall level of incidents on that campus dropped significantly. We were, like most campuses, we had what are called quiet rooms. We started closing them. And we had a ceremony about closing them. Every time we could close one and not use it anymore, we could reopen it as something the kids chose to do. And again, that collaboration. How are we going to get this done, and how are we going to do it together so that we can achieve a greater goal? And it works. It works, and it works by softening people through that collaboration and creating relationships as opposed to seeing people in stereotypical roles. A very simple example of this is at the same residential treatment center, we had a group of kids that were swimming. We had a swim club, and all the kids would get in the pool. Well, one of the kids had image issues, did not want to be in a swimsuit, had performance issues, didn't want to swim because he didn't really know how to swim. In a lot of organizations and programs, then that child would be in trouble. But we saw beyond the fact that he was refusing to get in a swimsuit. We saw beyond the fact that he wouldn't get in the pool. And we didn't make a big deal of it at all. And what we created was what we call parallel play, an activity that he could do right alongside. So we made him the timer. So his job was to click the timer. Not as much fun as being in the pool, but the pool for some reason was intimidating to him, so we didn't force it. Okay, so we're going with the resistance, not against the resistance. So this young man's job was to sit at the end of the pool and time things. In reality, we didn't need a timer, but we created that position so he could do it. And as time went by, he got more and more involved, got more and more comfortable, saw it wasn't that difficult, and eventually got into the pool.
So you helped preserve his dignity. You didn't shame him about not getting in the pool. You didn't isolate him and, put him in the quiet room or tell him he couldn't participate at all. You helped him save face, and you preserved and really cultivated emotional safety by giving him this role, so he could be part of the activity, but not really be forced outside of his comfort zone. And I love that. And I also love what Rita Pearson says in her video. We watched this in Core 1, but it's Rita Pearson, Every Child Needs a Champion. And one thing she says is kids don't learn from people they don't like. And I think so many times parents get into conflicts with kids out of a position of fear. And I think parents have this idea that they have to be this overpowering authority in order to get kids to respect them. And I think, kids might respond somewhat to that. But when we're working with kids in foster care and traumatized kids, it's all about building a sense of trust. And for these kids, they have been hurt and abused and disrespected and discounted by people in authority. And so it's not a surprise that they would have, a problem with authority. And as, professionals and foster parents working with these kids, we have to show them that authority can be respectful, authority can be gentle, authority can be likable. And so whenever we can step out of the adversarial authoritarian role and make it our mission to show kids that authority doesn't have to be intimidating. Authority figures can be safe. Authority figures can be respectful. I think that also creates the buy-in that kids need. I mean, just like Rita Pearson said, kids don't learn from people they don't like. And so for us to become likable authority figures, it doesn't mean that, we become permissive indulgent. Exactly. It just means that we're more down to earth and we're more likable and we're not threatened whenever kids have their own ideas or have their own wills.
But that's the key point here, is that in this case with this child in the swimming pool, he said no to getting into a swimsuit and said no to getting in the pool. It would have been very easy to take that no as disobedience
Yeah.
and want to consequence it because we feel threatened that you're challenging us. Instead, you don't have to go against that resistance. You can go with it. Join with the child and try and figure out why we have that resistance. Another case that happened, this is one that happened right here at Hope and Home. It's a phenomenal example of what we're talking about. We had a foster family come in here and say they would take 4 kids of any age. The very next day they have 4 teens. And these are 4 kids who planned an escape from the home they were in. There was severe sexual abuse going on and physical abuse and neglect, and they actually planned how they were going to get out. After a horrible incident, and this has happened time after time after time, but after one horrible incident, the older 2 said, we got to get out of here. And they planned, and they called DHS themselves, and they did it at school, and they got removed. And then they went into this one foster family of ours, you know the family. And the family was phenomenal at being flexible. They were very much almost the quintessential example of authoritative. They had good boundaries and they set good limits, but they were very flexible. And the older boy had witnessed his sisters being sexually abused for years, but he couldn't do anything about it. So he developed this sense of just learned helplessness. He couldn't do anything about it, and he withdrew into himself. And so when he came to Hope and Home, he was completely withdrawn to the degree that his hair was way over his eyes, and he just lived in his own world. They could get him to go to school. He'd passively participate, but he's flunking every class. He'd go home every night and be in his room. And he literally sat in his room for a year. Now, what was wonderful was he had a father who was getting his doctorate in emerging media and emerging digital technologies, and so they hooked him up with one of these multiplayer systems where he could put on a headset and interact with kids all over the world, playing games like some sort of world experience and
Video
quests and
games.
video games. And what was happening there was he was fighting dragons, and they could kill him. He could be eaten by a dragon or burned by its breath, but he couldn't be physically harmed. So it was emotionally and physically safe. He could lock his door and be there. And what was interesting is his parents were challenged a lot by other parents, saying, how come you're letting him get away with this? And the dad would rightfully say, he's not getting away with anything. He is in a terrible place. We're just letting him self-soothe. We're letting him get to a place where he can interact with other people. He doesn't want to be withdrawn from the world. What high school student does? Well, then all of a sudden there was a magical breakthrough moment that I just was so excited about. He asked if he could be a cheerleader. He came home from school one day and asked if he could be a cheerleader. And everyone's like, wait a minute, my son who's locked himself up and won't communicate with anyone wants to be a cheerleader? What happened? Well, it turned out that at school, the cheerleaders, and it's more like a cheer squad, as boys and girls, they weren't wearing cheer outfits, but they were wearing cheer shirts of some sort, had a car wash. And they got him, and they kind of encouraged him to be part of it. And like I said earlier with the swimmer that didn't want to swim, he refused to participate. He did not want to wash a car. He didn't want to communicate with anybody. So they gave him a sign. And he went out to the sidewalk, and he twirled the sign that said car wash. And I don't know if it's true or not true. I don't even care. But what I love is somebody said to him, you are the best that we've ever had. We had more cars today. We are more successful today because of you. And he just beamed because, and there's your parallel play. He couldn't handle being on the team that was washing cars, but he could handle being by himself by the road twirling a sign. And whoever it was, bless their heart, said to him, you were the best. And that made all the difference. Now he wanted to be on the team. So a great example of a parent really seeing through a lot of layers and seeing that this child needs to be in this room for a long time, not be shamed by it, develop a level of emotional safety, begin to have friends, but online friends, and then move out of that at his level.
He was in his room because that's where he wanted to be, that's where he felt safe. And a lot of parents, and I've seen a lot of parents take that very personally and have kids moved from their home because the parents' efforts to connect aren't being returned, and so the parents' needs aren't being met. But this family really did not take it personally. That's just one of the keys to handling any conflicts with kids, is not taking it personally and giving the kids the time and space they need to heal and following their cues rather than constantly imposing the parents'
Exactly.
will on them. So
If you're online and you're watching this and you haven't watched Core 1, Rita Pearson is, it's a TED Talk. All you gotta do is put in Rita Pearson education TED Talk and you'll pull her up. Absolutely phenomenal video.
And then Ross's book is called Kids in Crisis, and you can get that on Amazon. Ross Green's book is where we did the role play, and that's called The Explosive Child. Thank you so much for watching our training video. If you are interested in receiving more training, you can go to our website at www.hopeandhome.org.